The old fisherman stood at the edge of the rocky shore, his weathered hands gripping the painted wood of his small boat. Salt and spray gathered in his beard as his eyes scanned the steel-gray water stretched out before him. Tom Guthrie was not a young man, and the sea was not always kind, but he had known both as far back as he could recall. He remembered the bear. It had been 5 years or more, but he remembered. Black fur slick with water, dark eyes wide with panic as it thrashed in the icy river, paws scrambling for purchase on the crumbling bank. Tom had not hesitated then, throwing off his coat and boots, diving into the frigid current. He'd fought his way to the animal's side, wrapping his arms around its broad chest, kicking until his lungs burned, dragging them both back to shore in safety. They had collapsed there on the rocks, chests heaving, the bear regarding him with a look of something like gratitude, something like understanding. And then it was gone, loping off into the forest, and Tom had thought that would be the end of it. But now there were rumors, whispers trickling in from outlying farms and far-off villages. A bear, they said, a great black bear, ancient and knowing, appearing when needed most, guiding lost lambs back to the fold, leading a child out of the woods, standing guard as a family rebuilt their fire-scorched barn. Just stories, Tom told himself. Still, something in him wondered. He loaded his tackle and pushed his boat out into the surf. The chill wind cut through his flannel and he shivered, pulling his collar tighter. Overhead, gulls wheeled and cried to one another. In the distance, a foghorn sounded its low, mournful note. Tom breathed in the familiar air, felt the roll of the waves beneath him. Whatever was coming, he would meet it as he always had, with quiet strength and a steady hand. In the village, the days crept by much as they always had. Storms lashed the coastline, rain pounding on weathered roofs and wind rattling shuttered windows. Fishermen mended their nets and told their tales. Farmers tilled their hard soil. Shopkeepers minded their stores. The autumn chill sharpened into winter's bite, and the first dustings of snow blanketed the peaked roofs and cobblestone streets. It was on such a snow-softened evening that the bear appeared on the outskirts of town. He simply stood there at the treeline as dusk fell in earnest, massive frame silhouetted black against the purple twilight. A dog took up barking, sharp yaps splitting the muffled hush, and faces appeared at frosty windows. Then the excited shouting began. The bear has come. They poured out into the snowy street, men and women, young and old. Some reached for axes and rakes, fear sparking in their eyes. Others simply stood and stared in wonder. The bear regarded them all with a solemn, almost sorrowful gaze. And then it turned and vanished back into the night-dark woods. From that moment on, nothing was the same. Some said the bear was an omen, a harbinger of doom come to punish the village for its sins. Others whispered that it was a spirit made flesh, an ancient guardian sent to watch over them all. Through it all, the bear came and went as it pleased, appearing now at the edges of fields, now in gardens and orchards, in churchyards and on lonely pathways. Soon it became clear that the great creature meant them no harm. Children found themselves herded gently away from thin ice and back to safety. A family, lost and struggling through a blizzard, followed the bear's great shadowy form to shelter. A devastating rockslide was averted when the bear's thunderous roars woke the village in the night. Lives were saved, crops and herds were spared from disease and drought. Travelers found their way home when all seemed lost. And as the stories spread, as the bear's uncanny interventions became the talk of every hearth and pew, the villagers' fear ebbed away and a wary sort of gratitude took its place. For Tom, each new tale was a pebble added to the scales, tipping the balance from doubt to belief. He'd known, from the instant he'd felt the bear's coarse pelt beneath his hands, looked into the fathomless depths of those dark eyes, that the creature was more than it appeared. Now that knowledge settled into his bones with ironclad certainty. But not all were content to simply marvel at the bear's presence. There were some who looked at the great beast and saw only profit. And as the rumors spread beyond the village bounds, they began to draw outsiders like flies to honey. It started with a few souls trickling in, city types with more money than sense, eager for a glimpse of the miraculous creature. They tramped about with their cameras and their fancy equipment, offering riches to anyone who could lead them to the bear. Most came away empty-handed, but a few lucky ones captured a blurry photo, a few seconds of shaky footage. It was enough. By spring, the gawkers and glory hounds had grown into a stream and then a flood. They choked the narrow streets with their shining cars, filled the air with the clatter of their voices and the blinding flashes of their cameras. Camps sprung up at the edges of fields and pastures, trampling the tender shoots beneath their careless feet. The villagers were torn. Some welcomed the influx of cash, the tourists eager to empty their pockets. Rooms were let, meals and mementos were sold, and more than a few began to grumble that the bear owed them a cut of the profits. Others, Tom among them, watched the spectacle with growing unease. This was not right. This was not the natural way. Whispers arose of those who would do more than gawk and snap photos. There was talk of traps, of tranquilizer guns, of cages barely big enough for the beast's bulk. Tom took to spending his evenings at the pub, ears straining for the murmurs beneath the clamor, piecing together snippets of plots and schemes. And then one evening, a newcomer sat down on the bar stool beside him. The man was well dressed, his fine suit incongruous against the stained and dingy bar, his silver watch glinting in the dim light. But it was the hard glitter of his eyes that set Tom immediately on his guard. "You're the fisherman," the man said without preamble. "The one who fished the bear out of the river," a thin smile sharp as a blade. "Augustus Blackwell. I've come to make you an offer." "Not interested," Tom grunted, but Blackwell continued blithely on. "You're sitting on a gold mine, old man. That bear could make us both very rich men. Imagine it. The world's largest captive bear. We'll have them lining up for miles around. And all you have to do is tell me where to find it." Tom surged to his feet, his bar stool clattering to the floor. The pub fell silent around them. "I'll tell you what you can do with your offer," he growled. "You can take it and shove it up dash. Careful." Blackwell's eyes were flat and cold, the eyes of a snake sizing up a mouse. "I tried to do this the easy way, old man, but I'll get that bear, with or without your cooperation. Best you stay out of my way." With that, he turned on his polished heel and stalked out the door. The pub broke out in excited, nervous babble the moment it banged shut behind him. Tom stood still in the midst of it all, a sick certainty churning in his gut. He bought time, but Blackwell would not be dissuaded. They had to act, and act quickly. In the days that followed, Tom spread the word as best he could, pulling aside those he trusted, speaking to them in urgent whispers. The bear needed help. Their help. Many nodded, jaws set with determination. Others shook their heads, unwilling to risk their newfound windfall. Tom worked tirelessly, rallying supporters, mapping out patrols and watches, all while keeping one eye always on Blackwell and his cronies. It all came to a head on a misty spring morning, pinks and oranges bleeding across the pale horizon. A fisherman came pounding on Tom's weathered door with word that Blackwell had been seen leading a large group into the forest, armed with guns and ropes and heavy chains. Tom's blood ran cold. Time had run out. What came next seemed to happen both far too quickly and with agonizing slowness. Tom raised the alarm, his people gathering with whatever weapons they could muster: pitchforks and boat hooks, ancient firearms and sturdy walking sticks. They charged into the woods, following the heavy tread of Blackwell's team, praying they would not be too late. In a clearing deep within the forest, they found them. A knot of men with taut faces and white-knuckled grips on their rifles, all arrayed around the motionless form of the bear. Great ropes wrapped its legs and barrel chest, a cruel metal muzzle clamped tight over its snout. Blackwell stood tall among them, triumph gleaming in his lizard eyes. "This doesn't concern you," he called out as Tom and the villagers burst into the clearing. "Go on home before someone gets hurt." "No." Tom strode forward, placing himself firmly between Blackwell and the stricken bear. "This ends now. You're not taking him." "Him?" Blackwell's laugh was ugly and incredulous. "This is a wild animal, you sentimental old fool. A dangerous beast. It's worth a fortune, and I intend to have every penny. Now step aside. The only dangerous beast I see here is you." Tom retorted. He could feel the villagers at his back, could hear the creak of pitchfork handles and the click of cocking guns. This creature is a guardian, a protector. He's done more good for us than the likes of you could dream of. We won't let you take him. For a single, deadly second, nobody moved. Tom could see Blackwell's hand creep toward the pistol at his hip, could feel the ripple of tension behind him as the villagers raised their makeshift weapons. He tensed, feet shifting on the damp earth, ready to leap forward, to fight to his last breath if he had to. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw the bear begin to stir. A low rumble built in its chest, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the earth itself, to rattle the very stones beneath their feet. His eyes opened, deep and dark and terribly knowing. The ropes began to snap like old twine. Blackwell and his men scrambled back with shouts of alarm, their guns wavering between the villagers and the bear as it heaved itself up onto its great paws. Free of its bonds, it raised its head and roared, a sound like thunder, like rock slides, like the clamor of stormy seas. The men broke and ran, crashing off blindly through the brush, all thought of profit or capture forgotten in their terror. Only Tom stood his ground, one weathered hand outstretched in entreaty. For a moment, the bear regarded him, just as it had on that long-ago day by the river, and then it dipped its head, just once, in what could only be a nod of profound respect. With that, it turned and vanished into the trees, leaving only a sense of immense presence in its wake. In the days and weeks that followed, a new rhythm settled over the village. The tourists and treasure hunters drifted away, their fervor dimmed and their pockets empty. Those families the bear had touched, those it had saved or helped or guided in their time of need, they did not forget. They left offerings of honey and salmon and sweet spring berries wherever the bear had trod. And if some swore they saw it sampling those tributes from time to time, its eyes crinkled up in an almost human smile, well, that was a story for another day. As for Tom, his days fell back into their old accustomed grooves. Mornings spent on the rolling sea, evenings whiled away with rod and reel at the river's quiet banks. But now, when he closed his eyes, he saw a vast shape slipping through the shadows beneath ancient pines. He felt the phantom brush of thick fur beneath his palms and knew a deep peace, an unshakable steadiness that came from standing shoulder to shoulder with a legend made flesh. He knew the bear would not be back, not as it once was. It has taught them its lessons, shown them that there was magic still left in the world for those with eyes to see it, those with courage enough to stand up for it. Whatever else life held for him, for the village, that was a gift that would never tarnish or fade. And sometimes, when the forest was hushed and the night stretched velvet dark and fathomless above him, he thought he could hear it, a sound on the breeze, in the creak of branches and the rustle of new leaves, a sound like the deep, resonant thrum of a contented creature, a whisper of gratitude and kinship and enduring, unshakable hope. For a moment, he would pause, a smile touching his grizzled face. And then he would nod to himself and return to his meandering path, knowing that all was as it should be, and all would be well. The bear's legacy lived on, woven into the very fabric of the village like a shimmering thread of legend. Children were raised on tales of its exploits, their eyes wide with wonder as they listened to stories of the great creature who had once walked among them. They played at being the bear, taking turns guiding each other through imagined perils with gentle paws and sage rumbles. The older folk, those who remembered the bear's tangible presence, held those memories close like precious talismans. They gathered in the lengthening evenings to swap stories of its appearances, each tale burnished and embellished in the telling until it shone with the patina of myth. Some claimed the bear still watched over them, that they could feel its spirit in the mournful sigh of the wind, catch a glimpse of its shadow in the dappled shade of the forest. As years flowed into decades, the village itself seemed to subtly reshape itself in the bear's image. Blackwell's ilk, those who sought to plunder and exploit, found no purchase there. Would-be developers and avaricious schemers were met with a polite but unyielding resistance, their proposals firmly rebuffed. The villagers had learned to cherish and protect the wild beauty that was their birthright, to see the value in that which could not be bought or sold. In times of hardship or uncertainty, they turned to the bear's example. When storms lashed the coast, when boats were lost to the hungry sea, they banded together as the bear had taught them, sheltering and supporting one another until the crisis passed. When sickness struck or crops failed, they shared what they had freely, secure in the knowledge that they were all threads in a single close-knit tapestry. And through it all, Tom remained a pillar of the community, the bear's steadfast human counterpart. He became the unofficial keeper of its story, the one sought out by each new generation hungry for a first-hand account. Children would gather at his feet, their eyes saucer-wide, as he recounted that long-ago day at the river, his voice gruff with emotion. Young men and women on the cusp of life's great adventures came to him for counsel, drawing courage from the calm certainty in his eyes. Even as age sapped his strength and bent his back, Tom's spirit never wavered. He could no longer haul in nets teeming with silver-scaled fish, could no longer tramp for miles over hill and dale. But his heart, so long entwined with the bear's own, beat with undiminished vigor. In the twilight of his days, he was a living reminder that one did not have to be mighty to change the world, that even the humblest of creatures could leave an indelible mark. And when his time came at last, when he lay frail and fading in his bed, the whole village gathered to bid him farewell. They filed into his room in solemn silence, their faces etched with sorrow and gratitude in equal measure, to lay a hand on his arm, to whisper a word of thanks. Outside, the wind keened a low lament, rattling the weathered shutters like the drums of a stately funeral march. In his final moments, as the veil between worlds grew gauzy and thin, Tom found his thoughts turning once more to the bear. It seemed to him that he could feel its presence beside him, vast and comforting, could hear the slow thud of its mighty heart, smell the wilderness musk of its fur. A smile touched his withered lips, his eyes drifted closed, and then he was no longer in the close confines of his room, but out under the boundless vault of the sky. Towering pines and stately oaks stretched away on all sides, their leaves silvered by starlight, their branches beckoning in welcome. He moved among them with an ease he had not felt in decades, his steps buoyant, his body shedding the accumulated aches and frailties of a long life. Ahead, through a break in the trees, he glimpsed a vast shape waiting patient and still. His breath caught. He quickened his pace until he was running, flying, the cool night air streaming past his face. The bear rose to greet him, dark eyes bright with joy and recognition, and in that gaze Tom saw mirrored the depths of his own elation. They came together not as man and beast, but as kindred souls too long separated. Words were unnecessary. The profound communion of their spirits rendered language insignificant. Tom sank his fingers into thick warm fur, feeling the thrum of the bear's heartbeat pulsing in time with his own. A sense of incredible lightness filled him, of shimmering, transcendent kinship. He was home. He was whole. Hand in paw, they turned towards the star-strewn horizon, where far peaks shone silver in the moonlight and strange new wonders beckoned. Whatever lay beyond this moment, whatever marvels or trials this next great adventure held, they would face it as they had always faced the world. Side by side, two souls united in an unbreakable bond of love and understanding. With a final glance back at the world they had known, they stepped forward together into the glorious, unknowable future stretching endlessly ahead. Back in the village, as a new dawn painted the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold, the people stirred and stretched and began their day. And if, on the morning breeze, they thought they heard an echo of joyful laughter, a whisper of contented rumbling, a sigh of long-awaited reunion, they simply smiled to themselves, secure in the knowledge that their guardian, both of them, would live on forever, an enduring symbol of the magic that comes when two souls find in each other a perfect and unshakable home. And so the story of Tom and the bear passed into legend, but their impact on the village lingered like a tangible presence. It was there in the way the community faced challenges, with resilience, unity, and an unshakable belief in the power of compassion. It was there in the deep respect they showed for the natural world, in the gentle stewardship of the land and sea that sustained them. The years turned like pages in a well-loved book, each one adding new chapters to the village's story. Children grew to adults, married, had children of their own. Seasons cycled in their eternal dance, painting the landscape in vivid, ever-changing hues. Through it all, the lessons learned from a fisherman and a bear remained a constant. A guiding light passed from one generation to the next. In time, the village became known far and wide as a place of rare harmony, a community that had found the secret to living in balance with each other and with the world around them. Travelers came from miles around to experience it firsthand, to breathe in the atmosphere of tranquility and purpose that seemed to permeate the very air. They marveled at the flourishing gardens, where verdant plants heavy with fruit and vegetables grew in well-tended rows. They admired the ingenious water wheels and wind turbines that harnessed nature's power without imposing upon it. They listened, rapt, to the music and stories that filled the village squares in the cool of the evening. Tales of a time when a bear walked as a guardian among men. But it was the people themselves that left the deepest impression. The villagers' faces were lined with the cares and joys of a life fully lived, their hands calloused from honest work. Yet their eyes sparkled with warmth and welcome. Their laughter rang out free and clear. They seemed to carry within them a deep well of contentment, an unshakable sense of their place in the grand tapestry of existence. Those who stayed, even for a brief time, found themselves subtly transformed. They carried the village's lessons back out into the world like seeds on the wind, planting them in the hearts of all they met. Slowly, imperceptibly, the world began to change. As more and more people embraced the values modeled by a humble fishing village, the once quixotic notion of a global community living in harmony with each other and the planet seemed less and less a fanciful dream. In their most private moments, the villagers sometimes allowed themselves to wonder if this had been the bear's true purpose all along. Perhaps it had not come just to guide them, but to guide the world through them. Perhaps it had seen in their small community the seed of something greater, a template for a new way of being. It was a humbling thought, one that might have buckled lesser shoulders. But the villagers simply nodded thoughtfully and carried on, tending their gardens and mending their nets, raising their children and honoring their elders. They had been entrusted with a profound gift, a sacred duty. They would nurture it, day by day and year by year, to see it grow to fruition. They knew what Tom would have done, what the bear would have wanted. And on certain nights, when the moon hung swollen and silver in the sky, they gathered on the cliffs above the crashing sea to remember. The elders spoke first, their voices rising and falling with the cadence of the waves, spinning the old stories anew. The younger ones listened, eyes wide and hearts open, committing every word to memory. They knew that one day the telling would fall to them, that they would be the ones to pass the flickering torch of this saga down through the waiting centuries. And as the stars wheeled overhead in their ageless dance, one could almost imagine two figures poised at the very edge of the firmament, gazing down with loving pride at the world they had helped to shape. A man, rugged and tenacious, his soul forever entwined with the wild. A bear, majestic and wise, carrying in its heart the mountains and rivers and forests. Separate and yet one, a shining beacon of what could be achieved when the barriers between the human and the wild dissolved, leaving only understanding and respect flowing in an unbroken circuit. With each passing year, the stories grew, layered with new levels of meaning. Each listener found within them a unique resonance, a special wisdom tailored to the challenges of their times. And yet, at their core, the lessons remained as simple and as true as they had been on that fateful day by the river's edge. Courage in the face of adversity, the strength of community, the transformative power of kindness, the eternal, unbreakable bond between all living things. It was a legacy beyond measure, a gift that would keep on giving as long as hearts were open to receive it. And as the village's children's children pressed close to hear the well-worn words anew, as they looked out over a world poised on the brink of a new and shining era, they knew that the bear and the fisherman would walk with them always, luminous guiding stars on the path to a brighter tomorrow. As the fire burned low and the gathered villagers made their way back to hearth and home, a sense of deep peace settled over the land. In the rustling of the leaves, in the whisper of the waves, in the hushed murmur of 100 reverent voices, a single truth rang out, clear and incontrovertible. As long as there were those who remembered, as long as there were those with the courage to dream, the story of the bear and the fisherman would never end. It would echo down through the ages, an immortal testament to the extraordinary things that could grow from humble seeds of kindness, an enduring reminder that even the smallest of gestures could change the world. High above, the stars shimmered in silent benediction, bathing the slumbering village in a soft silver glow. And if, just for a moment, two of those stars seemed to shine a bit brighter, to dance and swirl in cosmic celebration, well, that was a secret between the heavens and the earth, a wink from the universe to acknowledge a story well told and a lesson well learned. The night wound on, and the village dreamed. And in those dreams, a fisherman and a bear kept gentle watch, their presence a never-ending promise. No matter how dark the hour, no matter how great the challenge, they would always be there, ready to light the way home. Generations passed, and the village grew and thrived, but it never lost its essential character. The old ways were cherished and preserved, passed down from parent to child like a precious heirloom. The skills of the fisherman, the farmer, the craftsman were honed to an art, their products sought after far and wide for their quality and integrity. But it was more than just adherence to tradition that set the village apart. It was a fundamental philosophy, a way of being in the world that infused every aspect of life. It was there in the way they settled disputes, with patience and empathy and a genuine desire for understanding. It was there in the way they celebrated, with joyous gatherings that included every last member of the community, from the oldest grandparent to the youngest babe. It was there, most of all, in the stories they told. For the tale of the fisherman and the bear had become more than just a cherished piece of local lore. It had become a living, breathing part of the village's identity, as vital and as nourishing as the very air they breathed. No child grew up without knowing of Tom's courage, of the bear's wisdom. The story was the first one they heard in the cradle, whispered to them by adoring parents as they drifted off to sleep. It was the one they played out in their games, taking turns as the noble fisherman, the majestic bear, the villagers united in purpose. As they grew older, they came to understand the deeper truths woven into the familiar narrative. They saw in Tom's actions a model of selflessness, of the power of one individual to make a difference. In the bear, they recognized the innate dignity of all creatures, the respect and stewardship owed to the natural world. And in the rallying of the villagers, they found an enduring testament to the strength of community, to what could be achieved when people stood together in common cause. These lessons, imbibed with their mother's milk and reinforced with every telling of the tale, shaped them in profound and lasting ways. They grew into adults of compassion and conviction, men and women who believed down to their very marrow that they were part of something greater than themselves. In a world that often seemed driven by greed and self-interest, they stood as a beacon of a different way, a living embodiment of the values that had guided their community for generations. And as they made their way out into that wider world, whether as fishermen plying their trade on distant seas or as merchants and artisans bringing their wares to far-flung markets, they carried those values with them like a talisman. In every interaction, in every decision, they were guided by the memory of a bear and a fisherman, by the knowledge of what truly mattered. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, their influence began to spread. People marveled at their integrity, at the deep sense of purpose that seemed to animate their every action. They were drawn to their warmth, to the genuine interest they showed in everyone they met. In a world so often characterized by superficial interactions and transactional relationships, the villagers stood out like a beacon of authenticity. Those who did business with them came to trust them implicitly, knowing that a handshake from one of the village's sons or daughters was worth more than any written contract. Those who worked alongside them were inspired by their tireless dedication, by the way they poured their hearts and souls into even the humblest of tasks. And those who formed deeper bonds with them, who came to know the quiet strength at their core, found themselves forever changed by the experience. Year by year, the village's sphere of influence grew. What had begun as a small ripple of positive change slowly built into a mighty wave, touching lives in every corner of the globe. And always, at the heart of it, was the story, the simple yet profound tale of a fisherman, a bear, and a community united in compassion. It was a story that gave hope to the hopeless, that inspired courage in the face of adversity. It was a reminder that, no matter how dark the hour or how daunting the challenge, there was always a way forward if one had the strength to stand for what was right. In a world that often seemed to have lost its way, the story of the village was a compass, a guiding light pointing towards a brighter future. And so, as the years turned to decades and the decades to centuries, the village endured, a living testament to the enduring power of its founding tale. Through war and peace, plenty and scarcity, the essence of the community remained constant, anchored in the bedrock of its shared values. Generations came and went, each one leaving its mark on the village's unfolding story. And yet, through all the change and all the growth, one thing remained constant. Whenever a child was born, whenever a couple was wed, whenever a new boat was launched or a new house raised, the tale of the fisherman and the bear was told anew, its timeless wisdom woven once more into the fabric of village life. And always, in the telling, there was a sense of something greater at work, a feeling that this was more than just a story. It was a living connection to a shared past, a reminder of who they were and what they stood for. It was a promise passed down through the ages that as long as the village endured, the spirit of the fisherman and the bear would endure with it, a constant presence guiding them towards a future as bright and as boundless as the stars above. In the end, that was the true magic of the village. Not some grand sorcery or supernatural intervention, but the simple, profound magic of a story well told and a lesson well lived. It was the magic of compassion, of community, of the unshakable belief that, by standing together in service of something greater than themselves, they could make a difference in the world. And so, as the sun rose and set over the village, as the tides ebbed and flowed and the seasons turned in their eternal dance, that magic endured, as constant and as essential as the air they breathed. It was the heartbeat of the community, the secret of its strength, and the promise of its future. A promise that, as long as there were those who remembered and those who believed, would never fade away. End of story.